chair of the Flood Resilience Advisory Committee. So welcome to our first meeting for this year. I know that some of you have participated in the past and some of you, like me, have not. So we're all gonna learn together today. Um, I'm really excited for us to get started this morning. And what I would like to do in lieu of a formal roll call is ask the folks on the committee to say their name and what agency or organization they're with and say something about the role of your agency or organization uh, in flood resilience. And then I would also, since we really don't have a big group in the room, I would of course like the staff to introduce themselves after the committee. And then I'd also like the members of the public who are here. I know we have members of the public participating remotely, and I'm not going to go through an introduction there. So folks will know in the future if they want to introduce themselves that they'll have to come and be here in person. So with that, I would like to, I'm gonna start with Mr. Pascal, if you don't mind.
Sure. No, Mr. Pascal, it's Fernando. Very nice meeting you all. My name is Fernando Pascal. I'm the Chief Policy Advisor for DEQ. Uh, In terms of resilience, I think there's a great role for DEQ in terms of resilience. Stormwater resilience is a growing field. I have worked on developing a definition for stormwater resilience for the Water Environment Federation, but we also maintain and develop the Stormwater Management Handbook. There's a lot of good specifications on how to do BMPs, and I think we need to add a resilience component to them. The handbook right now speaks very little about climate change and adaptation, so I think there's great opportunities in there to grow.
Thank you so much, Mr. Pascal. And that was an excellent job because I know you haven't been in your role that long. I look forward to working with you.
Thank you, same.
Speaking of people who haven't been in their role that long, hi everyone, my name is Nora Carlos. I am the new Virginia Director of the Chesapeake Bay Commission. I'm week 3 on the job, so getting caught up to speed, but obviously flooding and its impacts communities around the Chesapeake Bay watershed. So excited to learn more about what we're doing here in the Commonwealth and happy to be a part of the conversation.
Hi, everyone. James Hutzler, Virginia Association of Counties. Flooding impacts all localities throughout Virginia, not just Eastern Virginia. As we've seen in recent years, Southwest Virginia has been pretty brutally impacted by the effects of flooding. So just happy to have a seat at the table and appreciate you all for thinking of localities. So thank you.
Morning. I'm Joe Grist. I'm the Commissioner of the Marine Resources Commission. For our agency, our role is kind of obvious. We oversee the management of all the state-owned bottomland in the state, plus we oversee a lot of the wetlands and the sand and dune provisions of the Code of Virginia. So a lot of the permitting work that would have to be done with this comes through our office. Also, we work a lot with the working waterfronts, a lot with our commercial industry, especially trying to preserve areas that they can work from. And also, this is very near and dear to our agency's heart, is this whole topic.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Greg Steele. I'm the Chief Resilience Officer for the Commonwealth of Virginia. I think our mandate in our office is all hazards across the entire Commonwealth. We are not an agency, but work within the Secretariat of Natural and Historic Resources. So part of our mandate is to look at hazards, including flooding, without the boundaries of specific missions and programs that the agencies have to try to help facilitate a more efficient kind of implementation of flood risk reduction and resilience implementation across the Commonwealth, as well as engaging with localities and NGOs and other interested stakeholders and parties in the hazard resilience space.
Morning, everybody. I'm Chris Swanson, BDOT's Environmental Division Director. Within our division, we have an Office of Sustainability. Among several things that office works on is resilience. So we have developed a resilience plan that addresses 3 hazards for the time being: coastal flooding, inclusive of sea level rise and storm surge, inland riverine flooding, as well as landslides. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Raka Goel. I'm from the Department of General Services, Division of Engineering and Buildings. I'm myself a state review civil structural engineer. So I'm basically from the Office of the Building Official, and we are issuing permits for the buildings constructed on state property. So our role is basically to see for all the buildings permitted to be constructed in flood-prone areas, whether they're meeting the freeboard requirements, all the structural building standards and stuff. And we do that for all hazards like tornadoes, and we check whether they meet the standards, and then only we issue the permit if they do. Thank you.
Jitendra Ramchandani. I'm with the Secretary of Transportation's Office of Intermodal Planning and Investment. In my current role, I support the Commonwealth Transportation Board in the development of policymaking, short-term and long-term. And starting 2018, we have identified roadways that are at risk from flooding and have worked with VDOT on addressing those risks that come with that. Thank you.
Morning, everyone. I'm Robbie Coates with the Virginia Department of Emergency Management, the Director of Grant Management and Recovery. VDEM's role on the public safety side is to make sure folks, localities, and citizens are prepared. We do a lot of preparedness messaging in collaboration with a lot of agencies in this room. We do have a search and rescue program that we coordinate with the local governments with MOUs for swiftwater rescue teams in the event of a flood. We also administer grant programs coming from the federal government, pre-disaster and post-disaster. At the end of the day, we're a coordinating agency. We don't have a lot of resources, but we do bring a lot of coordination capability to the table. Thank you.
Hi, good morning all. My name is Peter DeLame. I'm here from Virginia Resources Authority. As an organization, we're focused on providing financing for infrastructure projects for local governments in the Commonwealth, and we manage a number of different programs that can finance all different types of infrastructure projects. Specifically in the flood and resilience space, though, we work with DCR to co-manage and co-administer the Dam Safety Fund, the Community Flood Preparedness Fund, and the Resilient Virginia Revolving Fund. So, part of the group.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Ben McFarland with the Hampton Roads Planning District Commission, and I'm here on behalf of the Virginia Association of Planning District Commissions.
We're asking people to say what's your.
I'm the Chief Resilience Officer at the PDC, so I help coordinate all of our resilience initiatives and also work with other PDCs across the state on similar issues.
Thanks very much, everybody. Next, we're going to have the staff introduce themselves, starting with Mr. Dallin.
Good morning, everybody. Matt Dallin with DCR's Office of Resilience Planning.
Daryl Glover, Deputy Director at DCR.
Hi, my name is Kelsey Liskey. I am a resilience specialist with DCR's Office of Resilience Planning.
Good morning, everyone. Angela Davis, Division Director of Floodplain Management at DCR.
Good morning, Caitlin Verdue with the Virginia Office of Resilience.
Good morning, Sigrid Lampy with the Virginia Office of Resilience.
Emily Breen, also with DCR, Office of Resilience Planning.
Great. Obviously, we could not have this. Give the things we're going to talk about without our wonderful. And then, yes, if the members of the public would please introduce themselves.
Ian Blair, Policy Director with Wetlands Watch. I will announce Jillian Churchwell is our summer intern helping us out with flood resilience this summer.
Emily Steinhuber, Virginia Director for the Environmental Defense Fund.
Oh, thanks, Matt.
Ashley Hall, Principal at Stantec.
Brian Batten, Associate Vice President at Dewberry.
Cameron Bruce, Assistant Director of the Virginia Coastal Resilience Collaborative at William & Mary.
Ty Smith, Senior Engineer and Water Solutions Manager at Resource Environmental Solutions.
Excuse me, Joe Underwood with the FOIA Advisory Council.
Thank you very much. And the members of the public who are participating remotely will be able to participate in the public comment period later. So if you'd like to introduce yourself at that point, you are welcome to do so. Next, we need to adopt our agenda, and I'll just say for the members of the committee, everything was provided to you in advance. It was added to the appointment that you received, and so I hope you realize that and that you were able to review it and that you're not just seeing the agenda for the first time. Since you have had an opportunity to review it, does anybody have any changes they'd like to propose? Can I get a motion to? Second.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, thank you. The next thing we need to do is adopt minutes from the last meeting of this group. And many of us were not here. So I'm going to take the privilege of just asking for a motion from someone who I think did participate, which is Mr. Coates. Would you be willing to move adoption
Yes.
of the minutes from the last meeting? Thank you. Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is our freedom training.
Just completed an hour training, by the way, as part of the EQ. Welcome. So very important.
Oh, good, good.
Okay. Well, thank you for having me today. As my name is Joe Underwood. I'm with the Virginia FOIA Advisory Council, and as a citizen who lives along the Rappahannock River, I appreciate everything y'all doing for us. Hope to keep you entertained today. I was thinking whether your staff was cruel or brilliant to start off the meeting with the FOIA presentation. I don't know how to get the ball rolling, but we'll get through it today. But this slideshow is available on our website. All the information, there's a guide to go to the companies that are on our website, probably provided to you in your packet. Just watching what y'all did this morning, the beginning of what the FOIA, the Freedom of Information, sets the rules for how you conduct your meetings, as well as how you respond to public records. I know many of you have some background with FOIA, but we're just here to remind you what the rules are regarding the meetings, and I will proceed quickly through this. But please note there's our phone number, our website, and our email. If you ever have questions, please reach out to our office. That's what we're here for, is provide you guidance. It may be the staff who's reached out to me a couple of times before. I know some of your agencies. I've recognized some of the agencies. I've had representatives from your agencies reach out to me and discuss FOIA matters. But that's what we do. We serve to help the citizens as well as the employees and public bodies, local and state entities, to help comply with the law of FOIA and to provide information as needed. Am I hitting the right button? I'm hitting down. All right. Oh, there it goes. Okay, well, we're going to, I mentioned we're going to kind of go through today. We're just covering meetings today, since that's what y'all are doing. Thought it'd be on point that we just the roadmap will kind of fly through this here. But the FOIA, you'll find the FOIA laws in Title 2.2, Chapter 3700, and it deals with public records and meetings. But the premise is under FOIA, the policy is that all meetings are presumed to be open unless otherwise specifically exempt by law. So therefore, there are approximately 54 of those in the FOIA chapter that allows for public bodies to meet with outside the public's attendance. But just know that those exemptions are narrowly construed, and there's a process for conducting those closed meetings under FOIA. But the FOIA applies to all public bodies in the Commonwealth. Being this agency is easily, obviously, a public body under the definition, more the traditional, created to create and have responsibilities to act on behalf of the public. There are two other types, those that are substantially, that are wholly or, make sure I'm reading this. There we go. Hold on. There we go. That are wholly or principally supported by public funds. Those count those for those nonprofit entities that may have non-government contracts, non-competitive government contracts or grants that operate. They would also be subject to FOIA. That covers a lot of like animal shelters, local volunteer fire departments. It could be maybe possibly be an environmental entity that receives county money to operate. If they're principally or wholly supported by public funds, they'd be subject to FOIA. And then there's any committees or subcommittees that traditional public body creates is also subject. Their meetings would be subject to FOIA and an openness requirement under that. Meetings is what we get a lot of questions about. Well, what is a meeting? Well, since you all come from different agencies, if the three of you ran into each other in the grocery store and just started chatting up, talking, saying, hey, how you doing? Sticking to topics such as religion, politics, or sports, those non-controversial issues, you'd be fine. If you started discussing the issues of the flood resilience committee, then you'd be considered having a meeting. So it's that second threshold is really what determines the meeting. You have to have a certain number, usually three or more in this size of a body. If it's the definition includes those public bodies that are 3 members total. So if 2 of them get together, they're having a meeting if they start discussing and transacting public business among themselves. And public business was recently redefined in the law just a couple of years ago to be that any matter that has come before a public body or likely to come before the public body in the future. So if he's running into each other, no problems. You can hang out, say hi, catch up, but just don't, start talking about your business at the Flood Resilience Committee and you're not violating the law here. So I think it's pretty straightforward. You can go to other meetings, like if say the group here wanted to take a field trip or go somewhere, that doesn't prevent you from doing so, as long as you kind of acknowledge that the intent is not to really discuss or transact the public business among yourselves or to take votes or anything, but pay more research, or maybe you're at a ribbon cutting or some other ceremony. That's acceptable. You'd like to publicly notify that if they did that, but the whole group. But if you had entities or groups that were doing it in subgroups or so forth, that would not necessarily be an issue, except for crossing that second threshold of discussing and transacting public business. And that's the definition there. All of this can be found in the FOIA. So I'm not going to read straight from the slides because, well, FOIA is kind of slow anyway. We don't need to do that to it. The key to meetings, there really are 3 requirements under FOIA. And now kind of a quasi fourth one, which I'll come to here because of the change in the law. But requirements under FOIA is that they provide proper notice of the meetings. That needs to be posted at least 3 days prior to the meeting. You don't count the day of the meeting. And there are 3 locations where it's required to be posted, and I'll cover that. Second requirement, that needs to be open to the public. As you obviously have room here for the public to attend, and you're doing transmitting online, that's access to do so. And then the third is your recording of minutes, which y'all just voted to adopt minutes. That's important. I would encourage you to be kind to the administrative staff. It's hard when you have 2 people saying second and then trying to determine who says it or so forth. So it'd be nice to speak clearly and take turns. It's kindness to them because that's going to be the official record of a meeting. If something goes sideways or whatever, what's the first thing the court or any entity is going to look at is what's the adopted minutes? What are the finalized minutes? So that's important. And there are certain things required to be in the minutes, and we'll cover that too. But currently for notice requirements, there's really only 3 things: date, time, and location, which I noticed y'all had that on your emails to me. At all important, I knew where to be, when to be here, and who was meeting. Notice agenda is not currently on that requirement, which it may change a little bit here. I'll talk to you about the law that's coming up July 1st, taking effect. Senate Bill 699. I forgot the public chapter. Location. Such as front office, the building, if this is like City Hall, would be in the display case, and there's also on the door of the administrator, the chief administrator, or the clerk for the public body. Those are the 3 requirements. And there's the state public bodies to note that essentially, since there's really no one central building for state entities, you can meet it there by posting on the website, Commonwealth's website. For regular meetings, like I mentioned, you have to have at least 3 working days prior to the meeting to be posted in those locations to provide notice to the public. If it's you don't count weekends and holidays. And then for emergency or special or continuing meetings, notice must be provided simultaneously to the public that is provided to the members. Okay, so that's kind of a situation. There must be reasonable under the circumstances why you're having a special or continued or emergency meeting. But those are easy to go through. You get to those process. Rely on your staff, and if your staff has questions, they know to contact me and I can provide guidance. But that'll be the case for those. Also, people who sign up for specific notice via email or so forth are required to be provided that notice and through email, so forth, aware of your meeting so that they can attend either in person or virtually. So that's another requirement under FOIA. I'm hitting the buttons. There we go. Okay. Agendas. So this part of the law has changed was going to change just a little bit effective July 1st. Currently, FOIA doesn't require you to post your agendas. It requires that doesn't even require you to have to adopt an agenda. But it does provide that if you do propose an agenda, that at least one copy is available for public inspection. Well, Senate Bill 699 will kind of change that. That will require a public body to post their agenda that they have prepared if they're considering to use. Now, there's not a date or requirement when that must be posted, but it does provide that once an agenda is posted and a meeting has begun, you're not able to amend the agenda at that point to take final action on matters. You may be able to add things, but you could not take a final vote. It would have to be carried over to a subsequent meeting unless it was time sensitive. We're still going to work out the details of explaining this when we come up with our legislative update, but just be the case that now, as you did this morning, you were talking about nobody had any amendments to add to the agenda. That would be a very important step going forward after July 1st. You're going to be very careful because if you did add things, you wouldn't be able to take a final vote on that unless it was time sensitive. Do you have any questions kind of regarding this? We'll give you guidance. We'll have some guidance on how this impacts going forward. But just to be the thing is, if you have an agenda, it didn't say it to be posted, but now it will be. If you have it, doesn't say when, didn't say it to be posted with the notice. The law didn't require that. It just provides that some agenda be provided to the public prior to the meeting so the public will know what you are doing. And most public bodies are already doing this because if you just post the date, time, and location, people are going to call and phone's going to ring off the hook. So most agencies are already going to include their agenda with the notice. This just formalizes that process a little more. But FOIA doesn't deal with parliamentary procedures or so forth. So just going forward, just to let you know how you operate is under the purview of the commission of y'all's rules of your council, how you choose to do so. Regarding openness, well, you've got it pretty much standard set here. Everybody can come in, public can open the door, they know, and they can sit down. There was a case where a lady was trying to attend the meeting and there's not as many people there. It was just the board, this lady and another person, and they didn't want her in the room and they tried to kick her out in the Wallstrom case versus Sussex. It was a case held by the Virginia Supreme Court, and I think in 2023. The case, basically the Supreme Court said that the public has the right to come in and record. That's the provision. You can't hold meetings in the buildings that do not allow the public to come in and or record the meetings if they so choose to. So that's the requirement. Obviously, I think you're going to continue to follow that. This is a lovely room, easy access. Parking may be tricky, but that's beside the point. But the FOIA doesn't address parking, so it's okay. But just allow the public to be able to attend and be able to observe you taking action on behalf of the citizens. Meeting minutes. Okay, so this is kind of the most important part of it because it is the official record of what happens today. They must be in writing, must be recorded, must include, notice the first thing is the notice, date, time, location. Also records the attendance and who is present and absent. And if someone is attending virtually or electronic means, that is recorded in there, the reason why, and the location of where they're attending from. It also must include a summary of the matters discussed, deliberated, or decided. That's a very important. And then any record of any votes. And FOIA requires that all votes be taken on the record. You can't create secret ballots or off the record votes or so forth. And if there's any reason for a closed meeting, that must be in that motion, and the certification vote for the closed meeting must be also recorded in the minutes. For state public bodies, there's a requirement to post draft minutes, and that's usually within 10 working days after the conclusion of the meeting. And the final minutes, such as your final minutes as you approved today, would be required to be posted within 3 working days on the website of the public body. They do not have a website. There's a provision you post in the same place as you would post the notice. For local public bodies, the requirement is not as strict. There's no requirement to post draft minutes, just the final minutes within 7 days of final approval. I know you may deal with quite a few regional public bodies. The rules, the FOIA Council, this is not really a central law for them. We advise them to follow the requirements for the local public bodies that they can post their minutes, final approved minutes 7 days after final adoption. They're not required to post draft minutes. So just be advised of that. As I mentioned, votes must be on the record. Doesn't have to be a roll call vote, doesn't have to be individually marked, but it must be recorded and then must be taken on the record. And then no public body can take action without a vote in an open meeting and on the record being recorded in the minutes. It's one of the provisions of the law. And no decision reached at a conclusion in the closed meeting can be finalized until a vote in the open meeting is taken during that. Okay. Any questions so far? No. You're all still awake, so that's good. The coffee's still working, so that's good. We're good. We're over halfway there. Oh, we have a question over there. Yes, sir.
I want to ask a question about the law.
It's once the meeting begun. Once the meeting begins, you can't add items to the agenda. You can, you just can't take final action on those items you added unless they're time sensitive. So the key is if you want to work your agenda up to the last day or the day before, you're probably good. Even maybe possibly if you're meeting in the afternoon to the there are some reasons. But for matters of final consideration cannot be voted on during that meeting if it's already begun, unless it's previously put on the agenda. Does that help? Okay. Closed meetings, I don't know how often y'all don't do many closed meetings. That's good. Good. We'll go quite through it. We'll just say that closed meetings are very particular how you do them. Must follow the rules. If you don't, it could be a very hefty civil penalty. Key being is that you have a motion that has three components: subject matter, purpose, and the law that authorizes it. That you, when you go into closed meeting, you stay on topic. Don't talk about anything else besides that what was identified in the motion. You can't have other people to come who are pertinent or necessary to the consideration of the topic. They can be invited even though they're not part of the public body. It's the public body's decision to invite them or not. Then you must certify those results or certify that you followed that law, basically, when you go back into open meeting. Closed meetings can't be conducted during a closed meeting. So just put it on the record in case there's an audience member out there or another official who's listening. It has to be start with an open meeting, go into closed meeting, come out of closed meeting, then you can go forward. Again, any votes you must certify, and then I'll take any action. It's recommended to take action motions at that time to enact any action that the committee wanted to take. But the certification vote is basically stating that we're certifying we stayed on topic and we didn't stray off and start talking about things we weren't authorized to do so out of the purview of the public. You don't have to take minutes during that time. And if you do take minutes, then they're exempt under the law. Again, it's a civil penalty of $1,000 if you fail to certify properly. There are many exceptions here for that. Since y'all don't do them very much, we won't go to them, but they're very broad and they're very applied to specifically to those specific topics and will be cited in the motion to enter into a closed meeting. Do y'all do electronic meetings? Good, we can cover electronic meetings. There's probably a little more points. There's 3 types of electronic meetings under FOIA. In September 2022, we had the General Assembly standardized 2 of the, basically created 2 types out of the COVID crisis. During the COVID, we used the state of emergency, pretty much every state across the union. I'm not sure they had a lot of experience with WebEx and Teams and other companies I should have bought stock in 2019. But the point being is that there are 3 types. State of emergency still exists while the state of emergency exists. But there's the remote participation where a majority of the board is meeting in person, but a member or members are attending remotely through electronic means. And there's only 4 permissible reasons for the law to do so. We'll cover those. And then there's the electronic meetings where all the members of the board are participating remotely. And the public is also observing and participating remotely in that meeting as well. So that's going to be strictly all virtual. But for the remote participation, which requires a quorum to be in person, and you still have where the public could attend in person, the members who are attending remotely have to have One of the bases being that either they have a medical issue, they're a caregiver of a person with a medical or issue or disability. If you have one of those two reasons, those persons count towards the quorum as if they were present. So that's good to know. The other two reasons are for personal reasons, which you must state. You don't have to state, well, I'm getting my appendix removed. You don't have to state that much personality, but you'd say I'm out of town on business. I am I'm on vacation. I'm attending a funeral, some reason more than just it's personal. And you're limited to how often you can use that to no more than twice or 25% of the meetings per year. The other one is if you're having a meeting, if a public body's having a meeting, maybe at a remote location or at an outside normal area, such as maybe going to Virginia Beach or so forth, but being y'all are statewide, that's going to be hard, but 60-mile distance would be a particular reason to use the exemption for that. Nonetheless, you have to have a policy adopted annually for both remote and virtual meetings. So hopefully every year you'll readopt your policy on that to allow the members, basically the process for allowing members to request ability to attend remotely and the approval process for that and the allowance for them to consider and be considering in the discussion and voting during the electronic portions of this meeting when they're attending remotely, that you don't restrict their access to participation just because they're attending remotely through electronic means. All virtual, similar, it's limited to half your meetings and you can't do all virtual meetings back to back, okay? Of course, there's no reasons to be provided for that because the whole board is, the whole public body is attending remotely. So there's no requirement to have a justification of why you're attending that way. Just everybody is. Again, state of emergency is declared. There's no requirement to have a policy that applies to state of emergency. Just when those go into effect, those are applicable during that time. It would be important to note that there is a purpose statement that is required for your board to continue operations during that time. If it's not deemed to be continuity operations of the public body to discharge the lawful purposes, duties, and responsibilities. If that's not required during that time, then you would not need to meet during a state of emergency for electronic virtually. So that has to be that's the threshold for that requirement. We have a guide on electronic means. We have guides on lots of things. We have guides on charges. We have guides on submitting requests, responding requests. We have guides for conducting meetings, use of emails. We kind of go, we have a social media guide. I'm not a social media person, but if you're using social media as a quasi-government website, then it may have access requirements and preservation requirements. FOIA doesn't require public bodies to maintain records. It's not about keeping records. That's the Virginia Public Records Act, administered by my friend over at the Library of Virginia. So FOIA just states that if you have certain records, then they are subject to production or subject to release unless there's an otherwise provided exclusion under the law. So we encourage public bodies to know their retention schedules under the Public Records Act so they can lawfully destroy records they no longer need to be in their possession because records in the possession of a public body would be subject to FOIA. One other thing I wasn't mentioning is that, well, I'll just kind of go from there. Any questions? Yes, sir.
Thank you for the presentation. Joe Gross, Marine Resource Commission. This is not a gotcha question, but with the exemptions, I understand the 60-mile travel exemption. What if they live in Tangier Island?
Well, it's if they're in a part of a public body, they could use that indefinitely. There's no limits to do that. It depends on what public body they're serving on. Unless the meeting's in
off the island except by boat, then to vehicle to get anywhere.
Yeah, it's measured. Yeah, it's just measured 60 miles if they're members of a public body that's meeting, not on Tangier Island, then possibly they could use that exemption if the public body's adopted the policy.
If the public body is at Fort Monroe though.
And they haven't adopted have they adopted the policy? If they haven't adopted the policy, then they couldn't attend, so they'd be treated as absent. If the public body's adopted the policy, then that'd be legitimate reason to attend remotely, or they could try to attend in person. It's up to for them to work out. It's not a good question. We had a public body right after that law came into effect. There was a public body that called me and said, we're a statewide public body, and all of our members serve a disability, have disabilities type situation where they would, and we don't meet in one location. They meet like if it's Richmond, but they'd all be 60 miles away. They're like, what do we do? And I was like, well, you got to adopt a policy first. They'll all provide. You got to be in person at one time, adopt the policy, then you can do whatever you need to from that point on. Because they have a legitimate reason there. So they decide to that. So. Yes, sir. Well, it depends. How are they created? Were they created by another public body? So there's three types of public bodies. The traditional ones that are set by law, and your traditional ones of town council, county commissions, board of supervisors. Then you have the ones that are created. There's the districts, commissions, soil and water districts, regional public bodies that are created. Depends how it's created, whether it's going to apply to FOIA or not. If they're just an advisory group created by maybe a mayor of a town, because it's responding to the mayor, may not be a public body. I don't know how it had to look to how it was created and the basis for that, those entities. Yeah, if one of the three parts is if a public body is created by another public body that is created to advise or take action on behalf of that public body, then they would be subject to FOIA. So possible.
Any other burning questions with regard to FOIA, whether they are relevant to this committee or not?
Well, I think y'all will be fine. I think y'all have a good leadership, and I think y'all have a background in FOIA, and I don't expect there to be any problems. And if there are questions, please reach out to us. We're glad to provide those. Just in case if you do get a public records request, the key is it will come to, because you're all board and you're spread out, staff's going to be responsible for compiling that, and their time is going to be 5 days, working days to respond. So they're going to reach out to you. They need you to get back everything to them as quickly as possible, of utmost, so that they can then process it and provide it to the requester in the timely manner as required. So that's all.
Thank you for all you do. Thank you for your presentation.
Well, thank you. I look forward to running into you again and help you otherwise. Thank you. We stayed on time, so we're good.
And really just a follow up to what policy for virtual things and virtual participation. That has been incorporated into a charter for this group. And Mr. Dallin is going to get up and talk about the purpose of this group and then also that charter. And before he does that, I just want to say the version of the charter that is before you is a scaled back version of the one that this group. And the blame for that. To Virginia. And so I asked for it to be revised in a way to make it simpler. And if anyone has any concerns about that, I'm happy to hear them. But that's the version that Mr. Dallin will be.
All right, thank you. Matt Dallin, DCR, Office of Resilience Planning. Wanted to give you all an overview of what's the committee's charge, some of the history. It's a relatively new committee that was established in House Bill 1458 in the 24 General Assembly session to advise, or directed DCR in coordination with our Chief Resilience Officer to convene this body to seek assistance and advice on developing, administering, and implementing the Coastal Resilience Master Plan, the Virginia Flood Protection Master Plan. I've got a list up of the different organizations, agencies that are a part of this committee. There's some notation because we work a lot with these different agencies in different related flooding meetings, whether it's the Interagency Resilience Management Team, which is led by Greg Steele, Chief Resilience Officer, or members of the CFPF, RVRF, Community Flood Preparedness Fund, Resilient Virginia Revolving Fund Advisory Committees. So there are some overlaps, but just wanted to make you all aware of that. We are required to meet at least twice a calendar year, and DCR provides the staffing for this committee. next slide go into some of the responsibilities that are laid out in code. Again, a lot of this, the requirements of the committee, the membership of this committee were established in what was called the Resilience Coordination Working Group that met in 2023. And then that led to that legislation in 2024. So you all will receive updates on the Virginia Flood Protection Master Plan, the Coastal Resilience Master Plan, and in a couple slides we'll get into, or later in the presentation, we'll get into what those two plans are and what they mean. And so we'll provide updates to you all, receive feedback on the development and implementation of those plans. And then you all can also advise us on how we are assessing the impacts of flooding on people, places, and the environment. Establishing the measures and goals, or metrics and goals, for flood resilience in the Commonwealth. A lot of that work is getting done in the statewide Virginia Flood Protection Master Plan. Prioritizing our policies, enhancing intergovernmental and interagency coordination. And so there's a lot of different opportunities for us to come together, discuss topics, provide you all with updates, get feedback, so that we can work together to really drive flood resilience in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Any questions on the overall charge and responsibilities of the committee? All right, so next up, we spoke about the charter, which you should have received a copy in the briefing materials. And Nikki had mentioned that we have reduced some of the language that we weren't either using or that was a little restrictive and gives us some more flexibility. You'll note that we do have two sections in the charter that covers the policy for remote participation, as well as the policy for all virtual meetings, very much formed based off of the requirements that are in code. And then if you have any, if you have a need to attend virtually, we just ask that you email DCR staff at flood.resilience@dcr.virginia.gov, and you are approved to attend virtually unless otherwise told you're not, as long as you're providing your reason for virtual participation with those four exemptions, whether it's personal reasons or for the mileage limit as well. Also included in the charter is the responsibilities, which we just discussed, conduct of business. So we've made some minor changes to the public comment section, where we're adding some flexibility of where that public comment can occur in the meeting, but we will always have public comment in this meeting. And then there's also a section on members' appointments. If the committee decides to form subcommittees, how they would be formed, how we could have any additional advisors or different staff participating in the meeting. There is a section also on attendance. We do ask that the same member is attending the committee to have continuity throughout this process. We do understand that there may be conflicts where you may need to send an alternate if you have a named alternate, and that is the preference rather than sending somebody that's not named on the membership. As Joe mentioned, you all members of the public body, if you receive inquiries on the public body, you should direct those to DCR. The DCR FOIA officer is the FOIA officer for the body, and we will handle and coordinate any FOIA inquiries on the public body and respond to those. So please do forward those directly to DCR staff. Again, the best email to use is flood.resilience@dcr.virginia.gov. Any questions on the charter? All right, then we're going to have to ask motions to pass and adopt the two policies for remote participation, all virtual meeting, as well as the charter itself.
They have to be two separate motions, is that what you're saying?
Where'd Joe go?
Yeah.
Where is he?
So.
I think so.
So I noticed in
in recommendations now instead of voting. See that is there, I think there's a presumption here that the only thing we would be voting on would be recommendations. Maybe other things, requests, other actions that I mean, I know we're not responsible for doing much here, but in terms of things we might ask for that might not recommendations, I consider broadening that up to be just voting and saying any vote should be. Idea is that everything is done by consensus, but if we require a vote for something, that a majority vote would be, of course. Just a thought.
I mean, I'll respond to that and say, I mean, it is true that the group has voted on meeting minutes and the group has voted on adopting this, is about to voting on adopting this charter. We adopt the agenda. Is the recommendation that you're making instead of using the word recommendations? I mean, I guess we could leave the last provision the same, but I don't know. What do you think is needed?
Yeah, so thank you, Madam Chair. If I may, I would suggest changing the section back to the original title and then reflecting.
Prior to the section on the role of the committee, there is specific things, section 1.2C that describes. So adding some of the restrictions to that will.
Right, scale that when recommendations are being made, they ought to be relevant to C, but that we take that are this group will option or something. That's kind of my reaction on the fly. You, Mr. Dallin, do you understand what Mr. McFarland, the word actions instead of these actions in 22B instead of when possible these recommendations, when possible actions should be adopted by consensus, where not possible actions may be taken by.
Yes, so section 22C will be named quorum and method of voting. And then section B, replacing recommendation with action.
Moving that.
Yes, Madam Chair, I move that we make the aforementioned amendments to section 2-2.
Okay. Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
One opposed? Okay, thanks, Mr. McFarland. Any other thoughts of changes people see? And we can change it in the future. So
correct.
We need to adopt this now to have something to use moving forward, but it's not set in stone. Yeah, need a motion to adopt.
Motion. Charter.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, thank you very much. Next, we are going to have public comment. And the fact that we are having public comment in the middle of the meeting is, again, blame goes to me. Because when I was a member of the public, until recently, it really drove me crazy to have public comment at the very end, after there was no opportunity to influence what was happening. But if people really like having public comment at the end and you want to choose to go back to that, let me know. But for today, we're going to do it now. Public comment is welcome on anything that is on our agenda. And first, we're going to ask anyone in the room, any member of the public who is in the room who wishes to make public comment to come forward and make your comments. Seeing shaking of heads, which I think means people don't have anything to say. Is that correct? Okay, Emily. Ms. Stein Hilbert, will you please go to the podium?
Thank you, Director Revner. Emily Steinhilbert, Environmental Defense Fund. Appreciate this group coming together and appreciate seeing some new faces as well. I've been a member of the public at this meeting many times over the last few years, and some of my colleagues have previously sat on the previous iteration of this committee, the Technical Advisory Committee. And I've mentioned this before, and I appreciate Director Revner's note about the public commenting earlier so that that information can be useful. And as we're about to discuss the Coastal Resilience Master Plan, I know many of us will submit public comments when those comments are due. But I would open the door to consider, for this body to consider inviting advisory committee members, not just members of the environmental community that I am a part of, but also of the wider nonprofit community, of other organizations that represent municipal bodies, and just opening the door wider to have more voices at the table moving forward. That's it. Thank you.
Ms. Steinhilbert. Anyone else in the room? Okay, and now ask the staff to make it possible for folks who are participating virtually to make comments if they wish. How do we normally do that? Do folks raise their hand virtually? Is that how?
Yes, we'll ask them to type into the chat if they would like to make public comment. And understand we don't have anybody requesting to make public comment that's attending virtually right now.
So our method of allowing people to indicate their interest in making public comment is the chat. And the question is, are we certain that they have access to the chat to be able to do that? Okay. Okay, so chat has been occurring. So we do believe that members of the public who are participating virtually could indicate their interest in public comment if they wanted to, and we have received no such interest. Okay, well then we'll close public comment. Our charter says at least 20 minutes, but I think that's just if we have enough public comment to fill 20 minutes, which we don't today, which is okay. All right, well then we will move to the next item of our agenda, which is for Mr. Steele to provide updates from the Chief Resilience Office.
Thank you, Director Rodner. So I'm going to take advantage of the bully pulpit and provide some updates that even go beyond flooding, just because I have the opportunity to share that here. Just so everybody kind of knows, we had 15 state government entities that meet quarterly with the IRMT. That is expanding to 16 at the next IRMT. We're going to be including the SCC, specifically the Bureau of Insurance, is going to be part of those discussions moving forward. They're definitely working in the space, and they have a very special interest in a lot of housing construction standards and things of that nature for wind and water damage. So looking forward to having them on the team. That IRMT has helped us generate a 74 count hazard list that we've organized into 13 different categories. Of those hazards, 4 really are priorities for us in the Office of Resilience. And by priorities, I mean we spend a lot of our time and bandwidth on. Flooding is number 1, whether it's coastal, riverine, or rain-driven flooding. That's still our number 1 priority. But we are also spending considerable time on energy resilience, on excuse me, public health, and specifically that's heat and heat resilience. And then water, and specifically that means water supply, water distribution, wastewater treatment, and ultimate end state of water post-use. We continue to partner with DCR on the CFPF and RVRF. Excited to see Reggie funds going towards this for the next round of CFPF. And we'll work to ensure that funds support the state's resilience priorities and see how we can better align local, regional, and state plans, which is no small feat. And I'm not going to promise that overnight, but we are focused on trying to figure out how we can align those. We are exploring financing options, including parametric insurance for those who are aware of RISE. They are doing great work in this space, and they made a presentation actually at the last IRMT meeting about parametric insurance broadly, and then a challenge that they're doing in the southwestern part of the state using the United Way efforts post-Helene as a model for how they might be able to structure a parametric insurance policy for that support. A big priority for the office is return on investment and how that resonates depending on who the audience is. Some folks want to hear $1 spent is $6 in return, or $13 in return, or $32 in return, depending on who you talk to. Some people that doesn't resonate at all. And they want to hear stories. How were people's lives impacted? How were things changed because of actions taken or not taken? So we're working on that. Let me see. And I think what I also mentioned just really quickly is we're working on building what we're calling a university collaborative work group that's intended to create some structure so that universities can although we're not talking about removing the competitive nature of how universities go after research, it's really meant to be more of a forcing function to enable better collaboration between universities where the structure is there, and not just because person A has a relationship with person B, and so they work across those universities. And so there's more to follow on that, but the intent is it's supposed to allow for more holistic, research approaches that hopefully will be competitive for Virginia and to unlock research dollars. But we'll also be trying to find a nexus to leverage the IRMT to provide research priorities from the Commonwealth and methods that those research activities can be implemented to that work group, to also kind of be a information back to the universities to allow for broader exposure and opportunity across those academic resources for supporting research. So I think those were my top level things to share for the group. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Steele. Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Steele? Okay. Then we will move to our next agenda item, which is Department of Conservation and Recreation updates. And the first thing that is here on my agenda is state budget. And my update is we don't have one. As you know, I'm sure everyone in this room knows that. It's of concern for everybody in state government, but the two primary funds that I am about to talk about are not directly impacted by the state budget in terms of the funding that comes into them. The CFPF, we will find out what kind of funding is coming in once the first Reggie auction is held in September. And then the revolving loan fund is intended to be revolving, although it won't always be. And it's the majority of funds that were appropriated to it a couple of years ago remain in that fund. So does anyone want to say anything about the state budget? If you have asked questions, I probably can't answer them, but you might know something I don't. You probably do. Okay. Let's talk then about I think the next thing is the Community Flood Preparedness Fund. I think we have a slide on that. Yeah. So round 6 was held at the end of last year. 124 million was requested, and 74 million in grants were awarded, and 33 million in low interest loans were approved. So I think everybody probably has had a chance to review the projects that were approved, because this was done at the end of, like I said, at the end of the last administration. And so if anyone in this on the Flood Resilience Advisory Committee has any questions about projects, you could ask them now. And if not, I will just say that the next round, we plan for it to open December 1st. And this what I will say about that is the CFPF has not had a consistent cadence in terms of when in the year the grant rounds are held. And we are hoping to move towards a more consistent cadence. And the idea of December has something to do with trying to sequence the CFPF after the DEQ Stormwater Local Assistance Fund, or what people call SLAF, because there is some overlap between the two. And so the idea is to let the SLAF grant round occur. I believe that's going to open in October, and then open the CFPF. Now, we may then move CFPF into the spring in a future year. It may be that having them 6 months apart makes more sense. It is challenging to be in a position where grant applications, questions about grant applications and grant application evaluation is occurring during the legislative session. It has to occur before flood season starts. Not flood season, hurricane season. So anyway, just to say that we want to move to a more regular schedule of holding CFPF grant rounds, and this is our first attempt to move in that direction. Is there anything, Ms. Davis or Mr. Glover, that you want to add to what I just said about that? Okay, thank you. And then the next fund that we operate, that is with the help of VRA, that is really important in this space, is the Resilient Virginia Revolving Loan Fund. And this fund was established to complement the CFPF, as I understand it, to have a source of loans that can revolve, and for those loans to be made through localities or other public bodies to private landowners, because the CFPF cannot be used that way. The CFPF is for planning and projects and capacity at the local level, at the government level. And the RVRF is intended to benefit private landowners. The first couple of years that this fund existed, as I understand it, there wasn't a lot of use. And then last fall, the previous administration determined that it would be an appropriate funding source for disaster recovery from Helene, and then also the storm that occurred in, I believe, February of 2025. We call them the winter storms of 2025, both of which impacted largely Southwest Virginia. And so a grant round, not a loan round, but a grant round was announced last fall for this purpose. And the eligible recipients were the 4 planning district commissions in Southwest Virginia. Other public bodies, not public bodies, it's not the term I want, political subdivisions are also eligible. But the primary recipients for that first grant round were intended to be the PDCs, because it was determined that the PDCs could help provide specific assistance to people who suffered damage to their bridges, to their homes. So in Southwest Virginia, a lot of people live on the other side of a stream from the road, and they have a small bridge to their home. And not only were many of those bridges impacted, but then of course the slope of the stream was impacted. So the idea was for slope stabilization and or retaining wall construction or repair, and the bridge. Those were the projects that folks had in mind last fall for this fund. Now, that grant round also mentioned the need for funding for additional kinds of projects, and such as buyouts and other projects that are consistent with the scope of the fund. And so the idea here is we are providing assistance to people who are impacted, and we are helping them become more resilient so that when the next storm comes, and unfortunately that region has seen so many storms in recent years, we believe there will be more storms and more impacts, to make them more resilient in the future. So it's not just recovery, it's recovery and resilience that we're trying to accomplish with this fund. So the last administration made that determination, opened a grant round, intended for the RVRF to work sort of in conjunction with a different fund that's operated by a different agency. That's the Department of Housing Community Development, which has the Virginia Disaster Assistance Fund, that was called? Okay, VDAF at DHCD. That was established in the budget. That's not a statutory fund. It was established in the budget for this purpose. And what we have learned since the beginning of this year is while it's a really well-intended idea for these two funds to work together, there are a lot of complications in doing that. And so what we did was issue a revised notice of funding opportunity this spring. And that public comment period for that just closed Monday, Friday, the other day, last week. And so we are now considering changes to this fund. And one of the changes that was made was that everything listed here, category 1 ABC, is now eligible. We have met with the 4 PDCs and we are working together with them so that they can start submitting applications to us. They were able to submit applications since December 1, but they haven't. But we believe they are now ready to begin submitting applications. And we will start to receive them even before we adopt this revised NOFO, finalize this revised NOFO. So an explanation of where this program stands at this moment. And if anyone has any questions about that, I am happy to try to answer or ask the staff to help answer questions.
Madam Chair, do you have a sense of why the PDCs have not so far applied?
It turns out that it really, from their standpoint, it made sense to work through VDAF first. And they say that they have been able to do that and they're starting to receive those funds. And that now that they know what VDAF will and will not cover and have an idea of the universe of projects that they can get done through VDAF, it now makes sense for them to turn their attention to RVRF and submit what they need to submit to us.
Thank you.
Okay, if there are no further questions about that, we will move to the next subject in our agenda. And this is really the bulk of our agenda. This is really the most important thing we're doing today, is to look at our Phase 2 Virginia Coastal Resilience Master Plan and talk about our upcoming work to do our next version of the Virginia Flood Protection Master Plan. And Mr. Dallin and Ms. Breen will take it from here. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Madam Chair. As you mentioned, and I mentioned earlier, we have 2 state-led flood resilience master plans that DCR is leading, but is very much not a DCR-only plan. These are collaborative efforts with many stakeholders involved. Just to give you a sense of framing with geography, the Coastal Resilience Master Plan is the 8 coastal PDCs, so that's the kind of light greenish blue, where the state plan is a statewide effort. So why is the state doing these plans? Well, there is a state entrance in resilience and flood control, and this comes from the General Assembly. We need to minimize the loss of life, property damage, and negative impacts on the environment statewide. Flooding happens everywhere it can rain and doesn't really respect or regard jurisdictional boundaries. Right? A lot of flooding occurs in our watersheds that span multiple boundaries. And the state really has a role to lead here in this space. And in the General Assembly notes that the state, there's a public interest that requires the management of our flood-prone areas in order to reduce the impacts. So we do have a role to play. And the General Assembly also supports and encourages flood resilience through the implementation of state-led plans, so that we're planning what we want to do, going out and act, learning from that, and then coming back planning and continuing this cycle of adaptive management and continued improvement. So this is what we are set out to do, minimizing the impacts from flooding. How we go about doing that or setting up some of the guidelines are the flood resilience planning principles. These planning principles were largely established in an effort called the Coastal Resilience Master Planning Framework that was done in 2020. And these principles were established in that effort and then later codified into code. And both plans reference these planning principles, and I'll go through the 5 of them briefly. First is that we're using the best available science and information. Flood data and information is improving. We're learning better where flooding can go. We're better understanding our current environment as well as what the future environment may look like with climate change and sea level rise and increased precipitation. And so we're charged with using the best available information to make the most informed decisions to move forward. We're also need to acknowledge and work to address socioeconomic disparity and find solutions that build flood resilience for all. Flooding can happen everywhere, but doesn't impact all communities the same. We need to be able to take this into account, understand the context of the flooding in different communities to be able to come up with opportunities and solutions that work for the communities where it's impacted. We also need to recognize the importance and value that natural nature-based systems or nature can provide and help manage flooding. Flooding is very much a natural event that occurs. It always has and always will occur. How it impacts us is really where we get involved in trying to mimic, understand what nature does. How does nature best manage flooding in its own environment? What can we learn from that, and how can we adopt that into some of our solutions and practices? We also need to utilize regional scale planning, right? We're working at this at the state level. Different regions have different priorities, different communities have different priorities. So acknowledging that there are differences and creating a framework so that the state can lead with our overall goal and vision and give the regional and local governments opportunities to make decisions on applying these principles, how it best could impact their community. And then our last planning principle is really fiscal responsibility. There's only so much money that we have here. We could engineer our way out of all this, but we can't pay for all that engineering and all those solutions. So there is a limit to the amount of money that we have for this, and how are we best using that money to buy down our risk and meet our charge of reducing impacts from flooding to people, the economy, and our environment. So that is the how we're going about doing this work. So now I'll get you a quick overview of the 2 plans, of what's required, how they're a little bit of the history, and what's laid out in code. So the Virginia Flood Protection Master Plan was established through legislative action back in 1989, had some initial documents in 89, 91, and then the most recent plan to date was written and released in 2005. It's supposed to be updated every 5 years. It's been a little while, and so that's why we're working on getting the current plan out. Some legislation 4 or so years ago put a new deadline that said by the end of this calendar year, we need to have the state plan released using a watershed-based approach. And then there's a number of items that this plan needs to include: inventory of flood-prone areas, inventory of the different studies, records of damages. But I think the most important are these strategies to prevent and mitigate flooding. And that was really the focus of our work. And a little bit later in today's meeting, we'll get into what we're doing with the statewide plan and where we're at and what are the next steps. So that's the statewide plan, which is very much everybody across the state focused on our policies and programs, with our key stakeholders being state agencies. And then we have supporting stakeholders at the regional and local level, as well as our other NGO community, federal partners, universities, and a whole host of others that have helped us through this process. And we'll get into a little bit more later on an overview of the different stakeholders involved. So state plan, now getting into the Coastal Resilience Master Plan, mentioned the Coastal Resilience Master Planning Framework, released in 2020. That came out of an executive order in 2018 that recognized the risk of rising sea level and our impact on our coastal communities, and really needing to have the state step in and try to provide some leadership on what are we going to do in the Commonwealth of Virginia to address this growing challenge. We released a phase 1 document in 2021 that focused primarily on coastal flooding, both tidal flooding as well as storm surge flooding. Got that out at the end of the Northam administration. Couple years later, a couple General Assembly sessions later, had new requirements of what needed to be in the Coastal Resilience Master Plan, and those are listed below, that we need to include all major sources of flooding, so not just coastal flooding, also riverine flooding, as well as rainfall-driven flooding. Include a list of our projects, updating our impact assessment, as well as updating on the status of the different projects. And so with the Coastal Resilience Master Plan, very much focused on those 8 coastal PDCs, with the PDCs and the local governments being the primary stakeholders, along with some of the state agencies that are located or have assets in this location. We've done a lot of work on these efforts and have made a lot of great progress on them. And we'll be getting to that presentation in just a minute. The next part that's in code related to these plans. So in addition to developing, administering, and implementing the 2 plans, legislature also says we need to integrate both of these plans. They have to be working together. And so what you're seeing here on this slide is up top in the green, the 2 state-led flood protection master plans, the one at the Commonwealth scale as well as the Coastal Resilience Master Plan, that they're integrated and working together. But we also think that these need to be integrated and working together with our locally led resilience planning, where our state-led can help inform and guide what's going on at the local level, but that what's coming out of the local level, a lot of the needs on how to address flooding in the community is also informing the statewide plans, and that it's an iterative process, that it is a connected and integrated process, so that we're helping guide and learning and continue this kind of adaptive process over the 5-year planning cycles for both the statewide plan and the Coastal Resilience Master Plan. So I'll take a pause there and see if you all have any questions on kind of the overview of the 2 plans and how they work together before we get into some of the details on where we're at with the Coastal Resilience Master Plan Phase 2.
Madam Chair, thank you. Mr. Dallin, it's great to see this slide in particular here, thinking about how all these different plans are supposed to work together. Does the department have some specific ideas of how this would actually play out in practice?
I think we have been looking at this, Ben. I think a charge for the Coastal Resilience Master Plan and the Master Planning Framework document, goal number 1 was prioritizing our projects. Goal 2, finding a financing strategy for those projects. And then goal 3 was interagency collaboration and building goal 4 is building resilience into all of our business practices. We haven't gotten there. This planning process is taking time, and we've had shortened schedules, and with shortened schedules, the scope has gotten reduced. So we've been very much focused in phase 1 on the coastal flood hazards and getting that inventory of projects. We worked towards prioritization, but in meeting with the committee and stakeholders at the time, did not move forward. There's also a challenge in that we do not have funding tied to the plans. And so we receive feedback from stakeholders, prioritization for what, to what end. And so that still is a challenge. I think that's an opportunity to work to try to tie the planning to the funding. So I would say long-term with our statewide plan, it's building a foundation to have interagency coordination so that we're working together and can provide guidance, our goals and metrics on what we're trying to achieve. And then at the regional scale, working to prioritize projects to help us advance those goals and objectives. That could be where we're headed. And I think interested to hear back from our stakeholders as well as the committee as what those opportunities could become as we move from this kind of current planning phase where we're hoping to release the coastal plan this year. We'll have a release of the state plan for public comment this year and finalize that next year. But then we've got a 5-year window to think about how that integration could be for the next planning cycle and work off that.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? All right. Then I'm going to hand it over to Emily Breen, who's a resilience planner with our office, and she's going to provide you all with an update on phase 2 of the coastal plan.
All right, can you hear me? All right. So I'm going to drill down into this master plan, phase 2. It's out for public comment right now. So largely what I'm presenting is similar to what was presented in the public webinar. Make sure I got this clicker working. Okay. So the phase 2 plan and the accompanying Coastal Resilience Web Explorer is what you see to the left. This builds, as Matt mentioned, upon previous efforts, providing a thorough assessment of flood risk by leveraging the best available scientific data, mapping tools, and risk assessments. The Web Explorer that you see there is obviously an online resource. It allows you to view the data that I'll be presenting on in the plan today. So really encourage you to take a look at that. The goal of this plan is to promote informed decisions across multiple levels of government to safeguard people, homes, businesses, infrastructures, and ecosystems. And it provides stakeholders with a deeper understanding of potential flood exposure and its impacts to local communities throughout the end of the century. So this phase 2 represents the culmination of significant effort over the last 4-ish years, to which many of you were involved. So there was sort of 2 major pieces of stakeholder engagement. This was throughout the plan in order to get diverse perspectives from the state agency, staff, local and regional officials, federal agencies, businesses, and the economic development community, including nonprofit organizations, residents, and others across Virginia's coastal communities. The TAC, or the Coastal Resilience Technical Advisory Committee, was also part of this process. That was made up of about 35 organizations with relevant knowledge and a stake in the plan's outcomes. They met quarterly to receive plan updates and give guidance. They actually developed over 100 recommendations for this plan, and then through iteration narrowed that down to 20 priority recommendations, which ultimately made it into the plan. Critical to the plan's development was the work of consulting teams led by Dewberry, Stantec, AECOM, and although I am the person presenting this, Carolyn Heaps-Picaro and Matt Dallin really shepherded this to where we are today. Okay, so the objectives of the plan. So the first objective is to provide a unified baseline analysis of the threat of increasing flood exposure and impacts in coastal Virginia. And it accomplishes this by providing localized analyses of the changing threats from all sources of flooding. And it quantifies projected flood impacts over multiple planning horizons. Because the methods for this production are consistent region-wide, findings can be compared across the coastal region's geographies. The second objective of this plan is to identify opportunities to create impactful flood resilience solutions. And the plan accomplishes this by including an inventory of government-led or supported projects and initiatives across coastal Virginia. And again, if you go to the Web Explorer, you can see all of the projects and initiatives that are currently in the inventory, and you can explore in a little more detail those activities. So let's talk a little bit about the enhancements or the innovations of this plan. So it does build upon the foundation established in phase 1. So it uses the same data, the same models and information, but it now adds several critical elements. The first is that it includes enhanced flood hazard exposure models that include coastal, riverine, and rainfall-driven data. It helps to understand where flooding is likely to occur and its impacts on our residents and visitors, built environment, and natural resources. It includes advanced impact and risk assessment metrics. It includes an updated inventory of resilience projects and initiatives, as well as funding opportunities. As previously mentioned, it includes recommendations from the Coastal Resilience TAC, and it includes strengthened stakeholder engagement. Okay, so what you're looking at here are the 4 major chapters of the plan. That chapter 1 introduction, Matt largely covered in his presentation, provides the history and the purpose of Coastal Resilience Master Planning. The second chapter is focused on defining the hazards, their location, their impact. The chapter 3 is focused on advancing flood resilience. So what are the projects and initiatives that are ongoing or planned? Talks a little bit about how to finance those. And then it includes the recommendations that I previously mentioned. And then the last chapter is looking ahead. So in particular, next steps and how to use the plan. And I'm actually going to start with how to use the plan today. So the first, well, I guess I should take a step back and say, you know, who is this plan for? It's really designed to meet the needs of practitioners in local and regional governments who play key roles in flood resilience. So the plan offers a valuable resource and information which can be used by these actors who are engaged in flood resilience efforts. So the first way to use this plan is to understand potential future flood risks and their impacts on infrastructure, population, ecosystems, and other assets. While there are many sources of predictive flood data, this plan's data is specifically tailored to meet the needs and reflect the conditions of coastal Virginia. It includes a unique analysis of tidal, rainfall-driven, and riverine, as well as combined flooding. And the plan's hazards and impacts can be visualized through the Coastal Resilience Web Explorer. So next, after taking a look at the data, after taking a look at the potential impacts to your community, we really hope that this plan can help local and regional entities to develop or to inform their own plans. So, for example, flood resilience plans, hazard mitigation plans, and other types of local plans. It can also be a valuable resource for understanding existing flood resilience work that's occurring across coastal Virginia. So again, if you take a look at the Web Explorer, you can understand what kinds or what other work is going on in your region. And it can be an opportunity to identify potential partners to help in the efforts that you might be conducting. The plan also highlights a number of ways in which various flood resilience actors can start to fill some of the existing gaps that the plan has identified. So an example of a gap might be locations where there is high flood risk, but relatively low investment in flood resilience projects. And so we hope that by using the data that's provided in the plan that you can also access in the data portal, that you can leverage that data, use it as a tool to inform your own decision making. So for example, you could leverage spatial data showing the intersection of social vulnerability and flood risk as a tool to support, for example, your capital improvement plan. So The plan also includes an updated list of funding opportunities. This is a living list, which we update monthly to connect stakeholders with potential resources to accomplish their resilience efforts. And then lastly, the Web Explorer and the Open Data Portal are intended to support local and regional practitioners who are educating the public about the changing picture of flood risk. So our stakeholders can leverage the maps and the charts in their own communication and messaging to show impacts to specific areas of interest. All right, so moving on to Chapter 2, I'm going to talk a little bit about the major sources of funding that the plan touches on. So coastal flooding, for the purposes of this plan, include tidal flooding, so also known as sunny day flooding, storm surge, flooding caused by winds pushing water upward toward shore during major storm events. The other two sources of major funding that we consider in this plan is riverine flooding, which you're all familiar with, and then rainfall flooding, which is flooding that occurs when heavy rainfall cannot be absorbed by the ground or the storm infrastructure can't drain it. So to give you a sense of what the models look like underlying this plan, what you're seeing here is a map of Charles City County. So that's along the lower James River. In this first slide, you're seeing the impacts of a coastal flood occurring 100-year return interval or 1% annual exceedance probability. So this is the flooding that you might expect to see after a tropical storm or a hurricane. You can see that there is still a fair amount of dry areas. Then when you add in riverine flooding, again, this is the 1% annual exceedance probability. You start to notice that most of those main tributaries are filling up. But you do see that upstream, they sort of abruptly stop. That is likely the FEMA limit of study. And then we're still sort of missing those lower order streams. So then when you add in the rainfall driven flooding, then you really start to see those lower order streams. You're seeing a fuller picture. Three flood types layered on top of each other. And then the modeling does not include stormwater infrastructure. So those are two things that we do want you to take into consideration when you're looking at these maps, but it does provide a more complete picture for a 100-year event. So just in terms of the data underlying the forecasting of future flood conditions. So it's a little bit small here, but throughout the plan, we are looking at 5 different planning scenarios. And those scenarios adjust climate projections and different timeframes. So for each planning scenario, we have 2 main components. We have a time horizon and a projection range. The baseline data captures historical and observed data. It does not incorporate anticipated future conditions. So this is sort of your base of comparison. The near future projections look at the years 2030 through 2060, and the far future projections are looking at the time frame between 2060 and 2100. And then recognizing that there is some uncertainty in climate modeling, we have 2 different scenarios. So there's the moderate scenario, which projects a more likely future. It's sort of a best estimate for future conditions. It is suitable for decision makers who are a little more risk tolerant. And then the high projections indicate a less likely but possible future with higher sea level rise and precipitation estimates. So these projections may be favored for use in decisions for which the tolerance risk is lower. Okay, so we've talked about the different hazard types that the plan encompasses. We've talked about the different planning scenarios, and now we're going to talk about the impacts. So we basically categorize impacts into 4 different categories. So we have community resources. So those are people in their homes, cultural resources. The second category is built infrastructure. So there we're looking at distribution systems like water, energy, electricity, communications, in addition to bridges, roads, and other transportation networks. The human infrastructure looks at those systems that provide for the well-being and safety of society. So these include emergency services, healthcare services, government facilities, childcare, education, food and agricultural services. And then the last category that you see there is the natural infrastructure. So that is a range of conserved working and undeveloped lands, including parks. Okay, so if you go to the Web Explorer, you see there's a lot of different, you'll see that there's a lot of different ways to explore impacts through a variety of different metrics. So you can look at exposure, which captures whether an asset is likely to experience flooding. You can look at it in terms of risk, which quantifies the potential cost and damages of a certain event. So sort of looking at some of the highlights of the impacts that this plan reveals, if you're looking at the near moderate future, so that 2030 to 2060 timeframe, in a moderate scenario, we will likely see an increase of about 13% in the acres of land that could be exposed to major rainfall-driven flooding. So again, in that 2030 to 2060 timeframe, we will likely see an increase in the number of buildings that could be exposed to major coastal flooding, so a 53% increase. We will likely see about 9% of lands managed for permanent natural resource conservation by tidal flooding. And we will likely see about 50% of the regional population that could be exposed to a major flood. So pretty powerful slide there. Now, this is a snapshot of the Web Explorer. So after you look at the plan, you can dive in online. Here is a snapshot of the hazards impact tab showing building exposure in the Middle Peninsula. And this is for a long-term high scenario. So here you're seeing the results. It's a little tiny, but in the map, you can see the annualized count of structures exposed. And then in the graph there to the left, you can see the acres of land inundated and the building exposure by count. So 2 different ways of looking at impacts. And then you can manipulate in the far left there which flood hazard you're looking at and the time frame that you're interested in. So Chapter 3, Advancing Flood Resilience. Want to talk a little bit about the projects and initiatives inventory. So the initial data call for that occurred in 2021. And then before the creation of this plan, we did another data call. And so we worked with local governments, planning district commissions to solicit data on their ongoing actions to build flood resilience. So for this 2024 update, we were able to add over 500 flood resilience activities and projects into the inventory. To date, about 3/4 of those are projects and about 1/4 of those are initiatives. And then of the projects, about 46% of those are proposed. About 42% are taking action or in process. And then about 12% of the submitted projects are in that complete stage. And then if you look to the right, which this figure was pulled directly from the plan, you can also see of those ongoing projects what phase they're in. So the site assessment and preliminary design accounts for that largest portion of ongoing projects. The programmed and final design stages are about equal in proportion, and then a smaller portion there is able to kind of, a smaller portion of projects are in that final construction phase. So some interesting information about, it creates a nice picture of the work that's ongoing and planned for the state. Another way to look at this data is, again, this is focused specifically on projects, is the type of project, right? So structural projects, so those are those engineered flood resilience solutions like flood walls, natural or nature-based solutions, which again, when thinking about living shorelines to reduce the impacts of flood and storm events, and then hybrid, which incorporates components of both of those types of projects. So you can see from this figure, again, it's kind of small, but the majority of projects in the inventory address stormwater flooding. So that's sort of an interesting finding. And the majority of those projects are drainage enhancements. And then about 40% of the projects address coastal flooding. That includes both tidal and storm surge flooding. And then about 10% of the projects address shoreline erosion using nature-based or hybrid solutions. So that's kind of a quick snapshot of what you're seeing in that graph, but it does provide some interesting, again, tells an interesting story about the type of flood resilience work that's happening along the coast. So if you are in the projects and initiatives inventory, this is what you will see. So this is an example of a project. You can see information like the location, the hazards that's addressed, the type of project, the phase in which it's in. So again, useful information if you're working on a project in the area and you want to see what's going on, you're interested in connecting with potential partners, great opportunity. And then this is a picture of an initiative. This is on the Eastern Shore. Similar information. You're looking at hazard addressed, the estimated implementation cost. And then at the very bottom there, you can actually have an opportunity to upload new projects or new initiatives or edit projects or initiatives that are already in the inventory. So again, this is designed to be a living resource for communities. Okay, so the last part of the Advancing Flood Resilience section are the recommendations of the Technical Advisory Committee. There are 20 recommendations. There were 4 subcommittees. They each recommended 5. I do want to point out that beyond these sort of 4 categories, there were some themes that emerged across all 4 of these categories. So things like collaboration and capacity building were common threads, research and data-driven decision-making, engagement with local stakeholders, and economic drivers for resilience and strategic implementation and plan uptake. So I want to focus in on this first set of recommendations. These are research, data, and innovation recommendations. I'm going to focus, hopefully you can read that. I'm going to focus on that third recommendation, which is a place where we're already starting to make movement forward. So this highlights the work that we as an office are doing to develop the statewide plan, which Matt just spoke about. This is a draft which we hope will be released this fall. It'll include goals and metrics aimed at enhancing our flood resilience capacity. So that supports that third recommendation. Moving on to the second set of recommendations from the Technical Advisory Committee, you see are focused on project prioritization. Again, I'm going to give you a moment to read through those. In this case, I'm going to focus a little bit on that last one, which we're already starting to make progress on, establish a coordinated framework to operationalize the Coastal Resilience Master Plan at local, regional, and state scales. So we're starting to make sort of first steps or more indirect steps towards achieving this by tracking data from how the CRMP Phase 2 is being used in local, regional, and state plans. And we're collaborating with stakeholders to determine how best to implement the plan, as Matt mentioned earlier. The ultimate goal is that the findings from this CRMP Phase 2 will help inform project prioritization, not only at the state level, but at regional and local levels as well. So the next set of recommendations from the TAC are focused on funding. These are primarily recommendations for the Chief Resilience Officer with support from the Interagency Resilience Management Team. They are, I would say, broadly focused on promoting awareness of the economic benefits of flood resilience and improving flood resilience funding mechanisms within a wide range of stakeholders. The last set of recommendations, outreach and coordination. I would say that we are making progress on 3 of these recommendations. OA, so develop and maintain a comprehensive list of available funding resources. So those, that pertains to the funding opportunities database, which I referred to earlier. And then the third and fourth recommendations, OC and OD. So I'll read them in case you can't. Collaborate with potential end users of the Coastal Resilience Master Plan to improve usability of the Coastal Resilience Master Plan and develop a strategy to increase use of the Coastal Resilience Master Plan, including local government and planning district commissions. So with respect to those 2 recommendations, we've already begun and have planned outreach to communities, developing CFPF resilience plans and hazard mitigation plans. And we're having conversations with stakeholders and consultants to figure out how best to share and communicate the data and findings of the plan. All right, so the last chapter here is looking ahead. DCR is responsible for administering and implementing the plan. So we are focused on 4 steps here: sharing regional findings, encouraging and supporting the use of flood resilience data, developing and implementing an adaptive management plan, and collecting and monitoring feedback on the plan. So once the plan is released, we're going to do a series of roadshows, introducing the plan to PDCs, localities, state agencies. They will be tailored to the assets of concern for those stakeholder groups. We are already providing tailored trainings to tailored trainings regarding the data to communities who request it. And then we are developing and using an adaptive management plan. So we've been piloting it these last few months. And that will allow us to evaluate and adjust our actions as needed. And then that last piece there, collect and monitor feedback on the plan. We will be soliciting periodic feedback from stakeholders, and we're developing a framework in our content management system to capture that, any feedback that we get for future planning. So this is just a quick snapshot of our adaptive management process. We'll be prioritizing ORP actions to advance annually. In fact, we've done that for this year. We'll be monitoring, reviewing, and updating the status of actions annually. We'll be evaluating progress on the success of those actions. and then we'll adapt as we need to. And so for any of the actions or recommendations that are ORP led, we have a series of metrics that we're tracking. For those recommendations that are not ORP led, Office of Resilience Planning led, we'll be tracking those in a more qualitative form. So lastly, we want to hear from you. We want to hear from stakeholders. As I mentioned at the beginning, this plan is out for public comment through June 3rd. You can go to the Town Hall website there to provide comment. However, we are open to questions and any comments you might have right now. So we can take a few minutes. If anybody has questions or comments they'd like to make, we can capture those. And then we can talk lastly about finalizing the plan.
Mr. Steele?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess I'm shooting from the hip here, but it's more of a comment or comments for the committee. Appreciate the recommendations of the TAC and appreciate the collaboration that we have ongoing with the ORP on those recommendations. I guess I just want to highlight that those recommendations came out before our office was really established and before there was an understanding of the competencies and capabilities of the IRMT. So although I understand the purpose and intent of some of those recommendations, I'm glad it's not static because we'll probably be trying to get after those in different ways than what are recommended, because my army of 2 people and I, have certain abilities and capabilities. The IRMT has certain capabilities. And I just, now that we kind of have some of that established and in place, you're probably going to see outcomes that are hopefully getting at what those recommendations are, but not exactly what those recommendations are. So just a comment for the committee. Thank you.
Other members of the advisory committee who have questions or comments? There is going to be a quiz on this at our next meeting.
Madam Chair.
I was kidding. Mr. McFarland.
Thank you. Well, first, I want to acknowledge all the work that DCR staff and stakeholders put into this. It's a tremendous accomplishment. I know there was a lot of work and a lot of blood, sweat, and tears that went into this. So we really do appreciate the effort. I do think in a couple, I guess, missed opportunities or things that maybe there's still an opportunity to address in the section on how, or just moving forward on looking ahead. I think that's thinking beyond those, oddly about the need of the state to step in additional funding. We intend staff comment submitting that. Thinking about, really do appreciate the addition of the compound flooding or the combined flooding, factoring in not just the coastal, which I know phase 1 plan, but adding in the fill flooding data and is also acknowledging the riverine flooding. There is a serious gap in how we understand our risk when it comes to flooding in Commonwealth, and also thinking about compound flooding and how those systems work together. I wonder if there might be an opportunity to think about mentioning some of those known knowledge gaps as some sort of planning for the next plan. Creating that into this document that we have identified these gaps, and we are intentionally going to be looking to address those gaps, several years. Next version of this. Again, great work. I have some thoughts on some symbology issues, and I'll adding those to staff. But I will end on a good note. I think the scenarios, the 5 scenarios, I'm really excited to see that. Really laid out. I think the way it was, shown graphically really helps to kind of crystallize how that might be used by local governments. And I know we're going to be taking a look at that at the HRPDC and thinking about how we solve our regional standards and design guidelines. But I really do think that's a really great way to frame the challenge of how do we go about taking these projections, factoring those into the staff and your team on together. I really think that's a highlight. Thank you, Madam Chair. Comments in writing.
On the committee. Oh,
Thank you very much for the update, and I agree with great work. In the tool that you have is going to really changes. That are the users of that. We will be providing to you. Instead, I wanted to mention one specific comment related to rain. Showed us the nice graphics on how determine rainfall flooding, really riverine flooding beyond the old riverine. Since you said that it doesn't map some of the stormwater areas, I think we are missing a lot of the risk that we have in the state. Now, I understand within the scope of the work that you had, you couldn't do stormwater modeling, but several cities in the Commonwealth stormwater modeling. I think it would be great to see if there's some of that detailed modeling better represent the risk in areas, in urban areas where most of the risk happens. So that's one of the comments that we're going to be providing and discuss how that can.
Yeah, absolutely. And I didn't really get into it today, but on the website, you can actually download the pluvial models. And we were on a phone call actually with Arlington County not that long ago, Arlington, City of Arlington. And they are using those models to incorporate their stormwater data at the watershed level. So we are starting to have some of those detailed conversations. Yeah. So that's a great
Not
comment.
only Northern Virginia, of course, Hampton Roads had some great seats, Norfolk, Portsmouth.
Yeah.
Really great thing. That's all I have. Thank you.
Ms. Carlos.
Just one question. Appreciate the list of projects and initiatives inventory, and you had mentioned, some of the reporting gaps and things like that. And I guess I'm just wondering, are there recommendations associated with how to make sure that in the future that we can kind of better capture what projects are going on, what future projects? So I guess what are the recommendations for making sure that that data set continues to improve over time?
Yeah, so we don't have a set of formal recommendations, but we are doing another update, which will be kicking off this summer. And we've been doing a lot of legwork with the PDCs to understand their capacity to upload projects and initiatives to solicit that information from their localities. And so in some cases where a PDC might not have the capacity to do all that outreach, we, in partnership with Dewberry, will be helping with that effort, providing technical assistance. And then we will be targeting some areas that we know just had really low input, but we know that there is likely work happening. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Great, thank you.
Any other thoughts or questions? Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Brain. That was a lot.
It was a lot.
It's been a lot of work and a lot of thought about how to make this useful, and really appreciate all the work from our staff and our consultants.
Great. Yeah, and just the last steps here are that once public comment period ends, we'll be looking through those, making revisions, and then submitting that to the governor for final review. We estimate that to be in July, mid-July-ish. And then we are anticipating having that final plan out in September. So thanks.
Thank you. Then I believe Mr. Dallin will be talking about our statewide plan.
All right, back again, statewide plan. So again, full scale. Statewide flood protection master plan is intended to be a comprehensive plan to align and enhance the Commonwealth's policies and programs. not only existing policies and programs that are currently in different agencies, but also new policies and programs to help meet the challenge in front of us dealing with flooding. This is an overview of the planning process. This process started in August of 24, if I recall correctly. I think the next slide, I'll get into some of the steps. Kind of broken out into two parts. Where are we going? What do we want to be when we grow up as a Commonwealth? Kind of look at that. What is the vision for the Commonwealth with respect to flooding? Let's establish some goals that we can work towards, have those common goals throughout all of state agencies so that we have that collective action and momentum working together to try to achieve them, and having the different objectives. How do we track and get a little bit more finer on our goals? So that's the big kind of picture. What do we want to do over the next 20 years? Try to have some consistency over that long-term action. But then within these next 5 years, on this 5-year planning cycle, start to discuss, how do we get there? What steps and actions should we be taking to make progress on these goals and objectives to achieve our vision? And with that, that becomes, it's laid out with different strategies on what we can be doing and how to go about doing it. And then a little bit finer scale is beyond those strategies, what are the specific actions that we can take, and that we kind of framed as our implementation roadmap, which is much more of a living document that will evolve over this implementation phase, where the vision, goals, and objectives and the strategies are really this framework and the bulk of our planning products. So mentioned a little bit kicking this off back in August of 24 with a lot of our stakeholders. This is an overview of kind of the 5-step process that we've been engaging with our stakeholders to develop the plan. So we kicked it off, really tried to set the stage on understanding the impacts of flooding. This presentation really focuses on the strategies, but in setting the stage, we've, as the state, procured additional data to better help us understand the challenges that we face with flooding. We've had kind of a data deficit, especially out in Southwest Virginia, where some of the FEMA provided products and the locally adopted maps are old, outdated, have limits of study, have estimated flood areas, really don't capture all of the areas where flooding has occurred and where we've seen flooding with a lot of what happened in Southwest Virginia, that it was flooding outside of the regulatory floodplain. So we invested in a product from a third-party provider called Fathom that provides us with rainfall-driven riverine and coastal flooding, not only today, but with future conditions involved at multiple return intervals. And that is a product that is available to other public entities in Virginia. And we've been making progress on getting different state agencies and local governments entering into an end user license agreement where they can access and utilize this data. So we won't be talking about the data and a summary of the impacts, but that data is available. We're using it to inform this plan, and we're hoping that others can use it and should be using it to inform their future decisions. So we use that to help set the stage, and then went through this planning process where we worked with our stakeholders to develop our vision, goals, and objectives, then prioritize some of the gaps, kind of knowing where we want to go, understanding where we're at right now. Between those 2 points are the gaps that exist, and try to understand what are causing the most challenges to moving us forward, and that helps build our resilience strategies. And then this implementation roadmap, which we've started building with our different stakeholders and understanding what we can be doing next. This is where we have some of those challenges with the implementation phase and lack of funding. We're really trying to, there's been a big focus on doing what we can with our existing resources and capacities and our existing policies and programs to try to enhance them as much as possible. But there isn't funding connected to help support our state agencies to implement some of these other new policies and initiatives, but we'll continue to work on this as we develop that implementation roadmap moving forward. Mentioned a lot of our stakeholder engagement. On the figure two, yeah, you're right, is just kind of the framework where we have our core, well, we had our planning team and the flood committee all represented here, getting updates on the plan throughout 2024 and calendar year 25. The next level out were our core stakeholders, which were primarily our state agencies that have the policies and programs across the Commonwealth to deal with flooding. And then we have another layer out of supporting stakeholders and then out to the general public. And we had a lot of outreach and engagement and a lot of participation from all levels when we've had over, 18 different core stakeholder engagements. So that included some of the workshops we did in this room with our stakeholders, some of our virtual presentations, as well as some of the different surveys. Had 93 supporting stakeholders involved and overall 373 engagements. So we've gone through a lot of effort to get to where we are here. And not just we, the collective we have put a lot of time and energy in putting together where we're at with the current plan. So I'm hoping that we can give you an overview of where we're at with that process and then really look towards implementation and try to figure out how do we put this plan, collective plan, into action over the next few years. So some of the final products that we're going to be working on, similar to the Coastal Resilience Master Plan, we will have a plan document. We'll also have a data viewer that summarizes those flood hazard impacts across the different types of assets in the Commonwealth. That'll be available online. We'll have a report in brief, which will be a shorter document, a little bit more than the executive summary of the plan, trying to help inform and share with decision makers on what this plan is and how it can be used. And then lastly, a status tracker, which will help us with our adaptive management plan, understanding the status of our goals and objectives and the metrics that we're tracking, as well as the status of the different emerging opportunities and strategies. What actions are we taking to be able to communicate out all the progress and all the hard work that all of us collectively are doing to share that with our stakeholders and make that available publicly online. So I just wanted to cover some of these key items that we've developed so far. So we've worked together and came up with this vision for our statewide plan for the Commonwealth, that we are a thriving Commonwealth proactively, right? Not being always reactive, proactively addressing the flood risks that we face to strengthen the resilience of our communities, economy, and the environment now and into the future, and really trying to be forward looking. And you see that common theme, kind of people, the economy, the environment, spread through all of our work here. Building off of that vision, what are the goals and objectives? And I'm not going to get into the objectives, which are listed out in the bullet points, but our main goals, one, which is the charge laid out in code, mitigating our impacts statewide, not only for current flooding, but also future flooding. And then our next goal is how do we do this together and advance lasting strategies and frameworks and relationships to help move this forward together. And thirdly, our third goal is whenever we're addressing flood resilience, we should always be thinking kind of what else can we be doing? Are there all additional co-benefits that we can get out of flood resilience? Can we improve the quality of life when we're doing a flood resilience projects for that community beyond just flooding? Can we improve and strengthen the economy? And can we also improve and enhance our natural environment when we are working in this space in both our projects and initiatives? So these are the goals that the stakeholder group collectively came together, and we've presented this to the Flood Committee last year, along with the objectives. Now, going from those objectives, the strategies, we've got 6 different themes that we've come up with in the plan. That is proactive adaptation, again, being forward looking and being proactive, not reactive all the time. What can we be doing to be supporting local governments, where a lot of this work really hits on the ground? Oops. So what can we do to support local governments? A lot of the work that needs to be done and a lot of the decisions is happening at the local level because they know their communities best. What can the state be doing to be providing information, capacity, finding and funding to move these items forward, which gets us into resilience funding. Another common theme with all this work is the money that's needed to pay for it and understanding, are we being effective with the money we do have? Are we being strategic? What else is needed? What other mechanisms can be done? Some other the themes are the data and information. Ben, to your point, trying to understand the compound flooding issues. What else do we need to help inform these plans? I'll say the past, I guess it's, been 4.5 years. A lot of time has been spent on data development, and I think it's been wise. We've needed this data. We'll continue to need data, and being proactive in that development so that when we get to planning, we're not necessarily having to wait for the data. And how do we communicate among our different agencies and maybe data users on what the needs are, working with our different universities and other subject matter experts to understand how do we get that and coordinate to deliver that. Capacity, another recurring theme, capacity and coordination, helping build capacity at the state and local level and working together. Coordination is a key component to all of this work. Open lines of communication, sharing what each other's doing so we're not duplicating efforts or conflicting efforts. And again, that aligned collective action to help drive and build flood resilience. So within these 6 strategies, we've got strategic themes. We have 15 strategies in the draft plan right now. And then the next level down are these emerging opportunities, which includes, I think we've got about 40 emerging opportunities of both existing policies and programs that we're doing that fit into these strategies and themes, as well as some new opportunities for different policies and programs to help us achieve our goals and objectives. So next steps in the Virginia Flood Protection Master Plan. We were working to get it out before the end of the last administration. Did not happen, but we've made a lot of great progress. We're working on getting this plan released for public comment in November. So in the meantime, between now and then, really working on updating the emerging opportunities of our recent activity. So where we have existing policies and programs, we're going to be reaching out to our stakeholders, understanding what are you all doing this year so that we can update that content in the plan. And do you have any plans for the next couple years, again, to help inform the plan, but also that implementation roadmap and try to move that forward. So we're going to be working on updating that in the next few months, getting it out for public comment in November. Another 30-day public comment period should be closing in December. During that public comment period, we'll be hosting a public webinar similar to what we've done with the coastal plan, as well as our next FRAC meeting or flood committee meeting will be in November timeframe as well. After we get the feedback from public comment, we'll be considering that, making final revisions, final review to get the plan released in its final form in early next year, looking at April, a little bit longer to get that final plan released with the plan time for General Assembly session and some lower capacity during that first quarter of calendar year 27. So that's an overview of what we've been up to with the statewide plan, where we're at with the document and the development of the products and what we're planning to do for the release. Really looking forward to getting both these plans out and released and really turning towards implementation. I think that's another great opportunity to hear feedback from you all as we move towards implementation, be able to share updates on what progress we're making, what challenges are we facing to be able to adapt and continue to make progress with these planning efforts. With that, I'll open it up to any questions on the statewide plan.
Steele?
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, I want to acknowledge the amount of, first of all, data and work and collaboration that has to happen for both the CRMP and for this VFPMP. And so I'm asking, it's kind of a loaded question, I guess, but it's maybe for consideration for the next rounds when we go into the next versions of the VFPMP and CRMP. But I'm wondering if any thought or if there are any thoughts about how prioritization fits into this, and specifically prioritization of types of infrastructure, prioritization of specific communities, depending on risk, prioritization. How would this plan go there? And I don't think it will now, but just because of how the structure is, but thinking outward, how would the state then kind of start doing that? Have you had any thoughts on that or any discussions on how that might happen?
Yes, we did. And it's a great question. Thank you. The stakeholders definitely considered that as we were discussing our strategies and the emerging opportunities. And so one of the emerging opportunities listed in the plan is how do we come up with a statewide inventory of projects and initiatives across both our local governments as well as state agencies, and better understand the needs to then use that to prioritize. And that's so there's kind of a two-step emerging opportunity. How do we collect all that information and then use that to drive prioritization to help achieve the state's goals of reducing impacts to flooding now and into the future, and how are we working together, and also tying in the co-benefits as well.
Mr. McFarland.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a couple questions. Mr. Dallin, I know, or at least my impression, my understanding is that the current plan has more of a focus on state agency actions. And a concern I think that we have is 10.1602 lays out some specific requirements for what's supposed to be in the plan. And I think, understanding the constraints that the department has for the current version, or the version that's underway right now, I think I echo Mr. Seal's comment that thinking about the next version of the plan of how we're going to actually achieve the goals and the standards that are laid out in 602. And I think, I second his remarks about prioritization. I think that's key for us to be thinking about when it comes to both the funding aspect, but also just, what do we spend agency resources on at the staff level? What do we focus on? How do we coordinate prioritization across different levels of, and from just last comment from a kind of a logistical perspective, I would encourage the department to make a version of the plan available for stakeholder review before public comment period starts. I think, seeing the document laid out, there are opportunities that exist before public comment to add new material, to change focus, to make amendments that are much more difficult to do from a practical perspective once that public comment period starts. Once all that work has been put into it, it's harder to change course. And I would encourage you to think about making it available so that others can review it and offer input on what changes may be helpful to make sure that the plan is actually as effective as we all want it to be. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Other questions or comments? Okay, thank you, Mr. Dallin. And then that brings us to our last agenda item, which is committee member updates. And we really welcome those to understand how all our work is connected and identify opportunities for collaboration. But it's also okay today. So I just want to make sure that everybody has an opportunity. So we started with Mr. Pascal last time. So if it's okay, I'd like to start with Mr. DeAlma. How am I saying that? Am I saying that right?
Close enough, DeLema.
DeLema. It's hard to read from here. Okay, but I got it. DeLema. Thank you.
Sure. So VRA continues to work with DCR on the various funding rounds for CFPF and RVRF. We have two pending loans that we're looking at through the most recent CFPF funding round. So we're excited about that because it's been mostly grant funding up to this point. So we're really happy to see localities that are willing to take on debt for some of these projects, and that'll of course help the programs revolve as well. We've gotten all the grant agreements out associated with that most recent round 6 also for the CFPF. And then on the RVRF side, we'll look forward to the applications that'll be coming in there. With the 1A grants, we had gotten some of that out to the PDCs, but that'll be sort of completed with this next round. So we're looking forward to working with everyone on that. So those are the most recent updates for VRA.
On the VDEM Can you all hear me? On the VDEM side, with the budget being signed for DHS and FEMA, FEMA has been active in publishing notice of funding opportunities for the Flood Mitigation Assistance Grant Program, as well as the Building Resilience of Infrastructure and Communities Grant. We have open application periods. Please refer to our website or see me after. If you want a business card, we can make sure to get you connected. We do have a way to sign up for grant alerts on our website, on our grant homepage. I'm happy to share that as well. We are taking on an endeavor to update our statewide recovery annex to our emergency operation plan, which has a long-term housing component. There is definitely some overlap here with the conversation we're having. And lastly, we are updating our, we have a state public assistance program that mirrors FEMA. We're updating that policy and application process. But other than that, that's all we have.
Well, yeah, just so that you don't have to say it out loud, my last name, which takes a few attempts, Ramchandani. So for the Office of Intermodal Planning and Investment in the Secretary of Transportation, one of the major things we do is assist the policy-making body, which is the Commonwealth Transportation Board that is responsible, assist them with the development of a statewide transportation plan. As part of the plan, like the flood mitigation plan and the coastal resilience plan, we go through the exercise of vision, goals, and objectives. But we also identify transportation needs that become eligible for different funding programs. And we also have 4 mega trends that we are observing. And so those that we track, one of them is climate, and under that, flooding and potentially other things. That will be reviewed, I'm assuming. We haven't shared, once we start presenting the plan to the Commonwealth Transportation Board, we will have a better sense of the policy direction the board wants. But I've been coordinating DCR past, and we also share information and learn dates that you have, the comments that you can see. DCR advance some of the strategies that
Start to of NG guided for and had a couple
And Chris Swanson, VDOT. If I can give a little background for some of the new faces and add up to an sit with our agency efforts. As Jitendra was mentioning, it really started about 6-7 years ago with his leadership and work on the statewide transportation plan, or VTrans, and that he did with our policy board, as a result of that work, we were charged in VDOT to identify a strategy to identify those flood risks that are identified in the action plan. So we move forward with developing a resilience plan specific to the agency. So in short, what that plan does is really call development of 3 things: a vulnerability tool, essentially similar to the CRMP mapper that was just shared. So we work very closely with this committee, the RRMP, CRMP tax, to make sure that our mapper was built on very similar foundation, framework, data sets, even using some of that same data, similar conclusions, but it was specific to our assets, which is our roadway. Once we know where our network is vulnerable to flooding and other hazards, built a suite of strategies that can be used across the planning, design, operation, and maintenance continuum, sort of an all-in approach, knowing that we do have to address this in our construction program. But as Matt mentioned earlier, we're not going to be able to build our way out of this because we are fiscally constrained. So we also identified a need for operation and maintenance strategies. Once we know what suite of strategies we could run that segment of the network, we developed a benefit cost analysis tool, understand what gives us the best rate, return on investment, or ratio. So those tools are developed. They're internal right now. We're putting them their paces on about 70 projects. Selected 70 across the state that just completed recent final design, so that as we apply these strategies, we have a strong understanding about what that does to the project scope and the budget. So we should be completing analysis in the next several months, not only to understand how it kind of impacted that specific project, but also the larger question of how much is it going to cost to address resilience within the transportation sector, just to understand where that funding may come from. Several of you may be aware, maybe all of you, House version of the IIJA reauthorization was released earlier. Tech formula funds would be created under the current. So it's very more to come in several months.
Resource 90 will help Habitat Policy Oversight Committee will do many things in providing guidance to our Habitat Division, which of course oversees such having a lot more beneficial use of dredge material, which could be used in low placement, other flood mitigating things. You need me closer than that? Wow. Oh boy. And the biggest thing for the new committee will be reviewing the actions of the Habitat Division, making sure we're staying consistent with the coastal policy, state resilience policy. So that's all going to be coming up this summer. So for some, there will be some more meetings coming. You may get invited. So looking forward to working with everybody.
Again, this is Ben McFarland. I'm with Hampton Roads Planning District Commission and on behalf of the Virginia Association of Planning District Commissions. A couple things. I really hope to be able to use this opportunity to bring to light some of the work that PDCs are doing throughout the Commonwealth. I want to highlight that one effort or 2 efforts underway within Hampton Roads and also Northern Virginia that we're both working on design guidelines for stormwater management that incorporate projected climate change. And just on a general note, that, you know, a lot of the work that's been covered by both the Coastal Resilience Master Plan and then also with the Flood Protection Master Plan, that recognizing that we're in a changing environment, that our future is not going to look like our past. Our regulatory standards have not really kept up with how our environment is changing, and I would encourage our state agencies to start thinking about, if they haven't already, and I would hope that they have, how to update their policies to better reflect that non-stationarity. And I would encourage you know, Director Robner to, if it's possible, to we would, you know, have briefings or invite them to come and present on some of the work and how they're thinking about updates to these policies. Just offhand, thinking about stormwater management, erosion and sediment control, dam safety, floodplain management. Understand some of the work that Mr. Swanson described that VDOT is doing. That there's a lot of work that's being done that's related to these older standards. And to be frank, if we're building to those codes right now, that we are underbuilding the infrastructure that we need in the Commonwealth. And so that's just adding to the debt that will come due later on. On a more, I think, hopeful or exciting note, this past General Assembly, that passed HB 1241, which directed the Hampton Roads Planning District Commission to develop a coordinated infrastructure planning framework that would address multimodal transportation, public transit, and coastal resilience. We are excited about this opportunity to work through some of the questions that Mr. Dowd and staff mentioned earlier when it comes to thinking about not just inventorying projects, but also prioritizing them and thinking about the different things that we can incorporate values. How do we really work across a region to think about what a regional priority might be or what a statewide priority might be in thinking about all the different actors and stakeholders that are part of those discussions. And again, we're already working on that effort right now. An interim report is due to the General Assembly by December 1st. So we look forward to having the opportunity to come back and update you all on that, and hopefully it can serve as a model or a pilot for how similar conversations can go throughout the Commonwealth. Thank you.
James Hutzler again with the Virginia Association of Counties. I'll say the one thing I'm definitely going to do after this meeting is we have a newsletter that goes out bi-weekly to all localities in the Commonwealth. A lot of staff are signed up, tons of Board of Supervisor members, local planners, things of that nature. And I'm definitely going to put a plug for the Coastal Resilience Master Plan in that. Hopefully you guys get some feedback. If any is given to me, we'll happily relay it. I'm sure VACO will send a comment or two in on the Resilience Master Plan. And other than that, there was a lot of discussion about how can the state better work with localities to give financial, technical capacity support. And I'm always open and happy to have those conversations, convene locals, other stakeholders to have those conversations, because that is one of the largest impediments that we have, that localities have when trying to implement or start these processes at the local level, is that the capacity for some of these localities is just not enough to start planning for flood resilience. So thank you for having me. Great discussion today, and always happy to help. So thank you.
Hey there, Nora Carlos with the Chesapeake Bay Commission. No updates from the commission, but just really appreciate the conversation today. And I've been thinking about the updated Chesapeake Bay Watershed Agreement and some of the tracking and deliverables that we have. So really appreciate the conversation around priorities and projects and how we're kind of measuring and tracking these things. So again, thanks so much for having me and looking forward to the conversation.
Fernando Pascal, Virginia Department of Environmental Quality. I am fairly new to this, so I really appreciate all the updates and learning about it. We actually have a meeting this afternoon with DEQ staff representing several programs on DEQ and resilience. How are we going to play? What do we want to do? And hopefully we can align and complement with some of the staff, some of the work that staff is doing. So look forward to those conversations. We also look forward to being part of the IRMT and seeing how we can support those efforts. And I think there is great opportunities to complement and take some of the design guidelines and everything else and start incorporating some of those new ideas into the existing guidance that the EQ has. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for those updates. And I, just say, I think I agree with Mr. McFarland, like some of the updates that you provided, it would be interesting to get a little more detail, and maybe we can make that part of our future agenda. So it's not just the DCR show. We had so much to share today. It had to be the DCR show, but it doesn't always have to be that way in the future. With that, I think we've come to the end of our agenda. So if anyone is willing to move that we adjourn, we can be done for today. Thank you. Second. Thank you. All in favor? We are adjourned. Thank you so much.